Welcome to Comic Wars. Think of the show as Fight Night, but without the mess of actual combat. The data will speak for itself before the outcome, but in case it doesn't, we will break all of it down in the outcome at the end of the show. Without further ado, let's get into the overview. All right, first things first. If we had a guest today, this is where we would do guest intros and guesses. I know it's been 3 seasons, not a single guest yet, unfortunately. Planning on it, still waiting to hear back from a few people. Potentially we'll have somebody this Friday, but we'll see. Next week, at this moment, we're supposed to have a guest. I'll announce that as we get closer to that date. But this is where we would basically introduce our guests. We would get little details about them, you know, maybe who they are, things like that. And then, of course, get into their guests. Maybe a little information as to why they're choosing that guest. Then we're going to get into the background details. This is more or less where we're getting into things like their height, their weight, their personality, their occupation, where their location is, like where they're going to be, where they spend most of their time. Little tidbits about them, things like that. And of course, once again, as I stated earlier, personality. This does play a factor in a lot of battles here. We've noticed this over the last 3 seasons. Personality is actually key, especially when a character goes bloodlusted. This is one of those things we have to go and discuss because there's characters that just can't go bloodlusted as easy. And so even putting them into battle just initially, it's not a possibility. As you guys will see today, I'm just giving you guys a little heads up. This will be the case with one of the characters today. After that, then we get into the feats. Now, this is more or less the meat and potatoes, the bulk of the data. This is where we go and cover things like character strengths, their durability, their speed and agility, their martial prowess. This is going to be like essentially like their combat skill, like how skilled are they, proficient are they with, in combat. Yeah, and then of course, then we get into ingenuity. So how they operate in combat. Are they going to be thinking on their feet, or are they just kind of more or less like a brute? This is going to break down kind of their mental process in battle. After that, then we get into their gadgetry, their powers, their equipment, what they're bringing with them, and that's going to kind of utilize, like how strong are their weapons? What are their weapons capable of? Of course, when we get into powers, where we break things down, like for instance, if we were going to go over a character like Tanjiro, for instance, he's got the demon mark. We're going to go over things like this. With Kenshin Himura, we're going to go over his mental state. We're going to go over some of the things he's accumulated over the years. There's a ton of data here today. This is actually one of our, in my opinion, one of the closest fights we're probably going to see all season. But like I said, this is just at this point. I haven't analyzed, what happens next. On the next lineups or anything. I haven't even analyzed anything really past this battle yet. So, but this is where we kind of break all that stuff down. And of course, data analysis, character pros and cons. This is all chalked into one. Data analysis is going to be more or less the math, the science behind everything, and of course the character pros and cons. We're going to show off the points, who we think is going to go and give an edge in all these different categories and why. After that, then we get into the guest analysis if we had the guest. Since we have no guests, this is also the time that we're going to discuss this a little bit, talk about some of these things. And if you guys change your guesses, this is a great time to put those down in the comments down below or in the chat, and we'll discuss it. And of course, after that, then we go into the outcome. This is essentially how we break down the battle, who wins and why, who's going to have the edge overall, and then why, of course. We gotta always have the why. After that, then we get into, of course, we announce the winner, and then we go and show off the preview for the next episode. All right, so let's get right into our first combatant, who is Tanjiro Kamado from Demon Slayer. So, Tanjiro, at the time of this, now we're not going to go on to full on Demon Tanjiro. because end of the day, that wasn't, I mean, there's a lot to break down in there. We're just going to go with the 16-year-old Tanjiro. So basically, right up until, like, right as he's fighting Muzan before he becomes a demon, we're going all the way up to that sun-breathing version of Tanjiro. So this is him at his most powerful, his peak form before becoming a demon. And of course, after that, he becomes Tanjiro again because they're able to essentially kick Muzan out of his genes. But he is roughly about 5 foot 5 inches tall, depending on the information you get. I went over a lot of this stuff was directly from the Demon Slayer handbook, but there were some things I didn't have access to. So some of these things were kind of a rough estimate. If he's going to be about 5 foot 5 inches tall, we're looking at probably roughly around 134 pounds. We see that Tanjiro is not really like super buff. He's very, very athletic. He's very, very toned up. You see him a few times. You can see with his baggy clothes, he just kind of looks like, okay, he's just got baggy clothes on. The thing is, end of the day, we'll break some things down, but the guy he's pretty ripped. So end of the day, this guy he's more of like an athletic build, right? As for his occupation, well, as his show, Demon Slayer, basically tells you he's a Demon Slayer. He hunts down evil demons. Of course, there's some that he tries to hunt down, finds out they're good, and he ends up protecting them. There's only a couple different cases of this. Majority of the demons he does fight, he ends up having to go and slay. But he had to go and save a couple demons that were actually good. And then, of course, his area of operations, Japan. As for his personality, well, he's very friendly, he's naive, and this does play a factor in several of his battles because he tries to see the best in people. And like I said, this is where this comes in. His naivete is a little bit of a weakness, at the same time it's kind of a strength, but he doesn't fully let his guard down. And he is optimistic. Now, mind you, he is very, very optimistic. He tries to go, like I said before, he tries to see the best in everybody. But he also tries to see the best in every situation. So, as we got to see when he went into the entertainment district, he had to dress up as a courtesan, if you will. And him and a few of his friends had to. So they had to dress up as females and get into the brothels, essentially, because they're looking for a demon there. And he was one of those ones that was like taking care of the brothel. He was cleaning it all up, and it was always spick and span. Everybody was super impressed with him. Like his comrades, of course, they were quite a bit different, but he was the one that he's always pretty much always respected by his by people around him. But he also has a very, very tactical mindset. I'm not going to say like extremely tactical because he's still a child, so his experience is going to be kind of where he lacks a bit. But he has a tactical mindset, so he likes to analyze the situation as the next personality trait here, that he's an incredibly fast analyst. This goes hand in hand with that. He analyzes the situation extremely fast. I mean, it's absurd how fast he analyzes the situation. So he can actually turn a terrible situation, one where he is completely outmatched. He turns into something where, he's keeping up with him. Guys that are way more powerful than him, and he keeps up with them. Like I said before, we get to see this with several different battles. Most of his battles, this is directly how it turns out. We got to see that there was only a few times where he was completely outclassed and he couldn't do anything about it, including his battle against Akaza, which then ended up turning out quite a bit different later on, where he actually outclassed Akaza. And it didn't take much. He's just absolutely he's more or less, it's like innate skill. He's just talented, just outright. But end of the day, those are two key factors that are huge in any fight that Tanjiro finds himself in. But on top of that, he's also got an indomitable will, which allows him more or less, he'll keep going even where there's injury, where he receives injuries which would pretty much incapacitate anybody else. He'll keep going. And just a little tidbit about him, his father was actually capable of using sun breathing, even though he was not a demon slayer. And many speculate that if his father wasn't in such poor health, he actually could have defeated Muzan on his own, which was the progenitor demon, also the king of demons. So, food for thought. As for his feats, well, his strength. Now, this is where, like I said, we're going to be going over this stuff. It gets very, very close in a lot of ways. His strength, especially, is one of those things. He's capable of decapitating a weakened Muzan. This is the progenitor demon, mind you. Human decapitation requires around 4,000 psi, and demons would require a significantly higher psi. And the thing is, when it comes down to it, there's people that say that demons have skin that is harder than steel, especially around their neck, because, well, demon slayers, they have to go and how they slay demons is they cut off the head of the demon with a special sword that the ore itself absorbs sunlight. And of course, the stronger the demon, the stronger the skin and durability, all this, and strength, all that. And when it comes to the upper moons, which are the ones that are just there's still quite a few steps below Muzan, but their skin is harder than steel, and he cuts through them like they're butter. Now, he did have a little bit of he had some help because Muzan was weakened. There's an anti-Muzan drug that they were able to get into Muzan's system that aged him over 9,000 years. But he was able to go and cut through, or even go for the full-on decapitation. So we're probably looking anywhere between, if I had to guess, probably closer to like at least 12,000 psi, possibly quite higher, because when it comes down to cutting through steel, steel's not one you just cut through very easily without using like something like a plasma cutter or something like that. So if you were to go and steel on steel, as we'll explain with Kenshin as well, we're looking like it's probably closer to 300,000 psi, if possible. And that's, once again, just to break steel, it's 40,000 psi roughly. So that's just to break it. That's going to be where it kind of snaps and stuff. But of course, the skin is not steel. Its skin's also one of those things that actually has a really high tensile strength. It's ridiculous. But I digress. There's a lot going on here, but we're going to say it definitely has to be over 4,000 psi for him to be able to do that. And like I said, it's probably closer to like getting up towards the 300,000 psi. He's also capable of casually breaking a person's arm with just his grip, so this should tell you how strong he is physically. And that takes around at least 1,700 psi just to be able to do that. But he casually does this, so we're looking like a ridiculously high psi just on that, but it's at least that. And he's also capable of pushing a boulder weighing close to 38,000 pounds. It was like 37,917 pounds to be exact. But he was able to push that. And that's quite a feat. I mean, you don't see every day just somebody 38,000 pounds. Yeah, I'm gonna push that. Now he pushed this all the way across the town too. And that was for training. So we know he is ridiculously strong. At least superhuman. I mean, he's like lower tier, kind of going into the mid-tier superhuman strength. But as for his durability, well, he survived attacks capable of destroying buildings and attacks capable of cutting through steel, and was able to continue fighting for prolonged amounts of time afterwards. He kept fighting Muzan for an upwards, like he was fighting for 5 hours straight, but they fought him from like late night into sunrise. That's hours, and they kept fighting. That takes a lot of stamina, for one. But he was able to go and take hits from guys like Muzan. He lost an eye and kept fighting. The blood loss itself would have been ridiculous. We're going to get into why it wasn't lethal, and why the wounds he'd received weren't lethal. He was also poisoned for majority of this fight as well. This poison was going through his system, and he would just took it for hours. He just let it happen. He's like, all right, well, I got to deal with it. So, but he kept fighting even under those, and even then he kept getting stronger. That's the ridiculous part about Tanjiro, is he keeps getting stronger. He's got explosive amounts of growth the longer he's in battle, which we'll get into in just a sec more about that. But as for his speed and agility, he's capable of also reacting to Muzan's flesh whips. They are flesh whips because at the end of the day, what are they? tentacle whip things he launches from his body. That's all they are. They're his flesh. And so they weren't exactly going faster than the speed of sound, so they weren't breaking the sound barrier. But the thing is, he was reacting. He's dodging, and on top of that, blocking. His reaction speed is roughly around 767 miles per hour. So he's almost going to that breaking the sound barrier. As far as combat capabilities, martial arts police, he's technically gone through Hashira training, which Hashira were considered the best swordsmen of their time. Well, at least when it came to demon slaying, but if you were to look at their capabilities, other swordsmen wouldn't have been capable of even coming close to the Hashira. But it was sword and expert level breathing techniques. He focused a lot on his water breathing, but he was training in his sun breathing style as well. But the thing is, he's not a master swordsman like a lot of people claim he is. He's not. He's around expert level, but he's not a master. But he does have a very, very advanced tier of swordsmanship. So when it comes down to just fighting just like regular everyday masters, yeah, he'd win no problem. But when it comes down to Hashira level, he's a Hashira level for sure. And even him in his peak, by far probably the strongest of all the Hashira. But he never actually became a Hashira. As for his ingenuity, we talked about this a little bit already, he quickly adapts to opponents' strengths and weaknesses, and his skills improve greatly as the battle prolongs. This is a huge thing here. Characters that have that capability are absolutely phenomenal, because they can go from being incredibly weak, like not having a chance, to having a chance over just a matter, in some cases, like with Tanjiro. The longer that battle goes on, and we're talking if it hits an hour-long battle, he's gonna go and probably surpass almost whoever he's going against, unless they're like some ridiculous amount, like, you know, characters that are just absolutely super fantastic. Today's combatant is not. He's a lot more grounded. I'm gonna just use that in some massive air quotes here, because end of the day, he's not grounded still. Some of the capabilities he's got, they're not, at least from what we've seen in reality, it's not possible, right? But he's closer to being more realistic than a lot of other combatants we've had on here before. All right, and on to our last bit of feats. We have his powers. Oh, you guys can see it's quite a list here. So he's got his Demon Slayer mark. Now, what this does is the user gains superhuman levels of strength, speed, and heightened senses. Now, this does come at a cost. It does shorten their life. They can only live till about 25 years old, typically. However, that being said, Tanjiro's he was able to last longer than that. He actually lived a long life afterwards. That was because Muzan went into his system, and then they were able to kick him out. And for whatever reason, that seems to be, at least from what I could tell, that seems to be what healed him of that. He still had the Demon Slayer mark, but that's more or less what allowed him to live past his 25-year mark, because Muzan was in his system and it gave him a regular life after that. But I could be incorrect on this. It's my speculation here. But the Demon Slayer mark does give those things. As for his other powers, well, he's got low tier superhuman sense of smell naturally. It's to the point where it gets on to, we're getting in like precognition with it because of what he smells. He can smell animals at quite the distance, insects. He can smell, like, for instance, sweat. He can smell even to the point where he's done some ridiculous things. His sense of smells allowed him to tell if somebody's lying or not, and weird things like this. But it's his sense of smells, more or less, it goes into low tier precognition as well. That being said, he also has that from experience battling demons. He does have low tier precognition, so he can more or less analyze. Now there's more to it, of course, but he's also capable of using the bright red Nichiren blade, which it's not going to matter in this because Kenshin's not a demon. But if he was a demon, this is something that anything like, for instance, vampires, for instance, this is something that can kill a vampire, straight up, no problem, because it absorbs sunlight. So we're talking the typical vampire, yeah, it's going to cut right through them, no problem, absolutely just destroy them. But he's also got access to the transparent world. Now, some of his abilities here, like this one, they are a little lengthy. So, I'm going to read this verbatim so you guys can see directly what it is. But the user can see the blood flow and muscles of their opponent. It's like X-ray vision, almost like they can see it. They see right through the skin to see this. And they can see this of their opponent, which allows the user to actually accurately see what their opponent's about to do before their opponent can see the user to actually accurately see what their opponent's about to do before their opponent can actually fully launch their attack. So it's their muscle twitches, the blood flow, where it's going, where they're thinking. The minute they're thinking it, of course, these high-level combatants, the minute they think it, their body's already reacting to it. So the blood flows automatically where it needs to go. Their muscles are twitching. They're getting ready to go already before their attack is technically to that point of launch. And he's able to see this, so he reacts to everything. So he reacts so fast to him at that point that he's able to kind of get to their weak point cells. And this includes with demons, because at this point he can also see inside the demons, so he can see where their hearts are at. Muzan has a few hearts. He can see where they're at. This is a gift that only a few demon slayers have had over time, and the other one was the original Sun Breather, which was Yoriichi. And he had the exact same power, which is what allowed him to almost kill Muzan. So, I digress. But it's quite the powerful little tool here. It's a lot more powerful than one would think. This will come in handy for him in this battle as well. On top of that, he's also got total concentration breathing. Now, what this does is the user recovers from wounds faster, can almost completely stop wounds from bleeding, and enhances the user's strength for a prolonged amount of time. And this is about at least an hour or so. Like I said before, he had that long battle against Muzan. Now, this is also after he was also going through an entire, what was called the Infant Castle, which is Muzan's little magical, like it was almost like a pocket dimension. But he ran through there and was just slicing and dicing the demons along with other Hashira and his friends as well, and just slaughtering them. We're talking even up into the upper moon tier, which is, like I said before, steps below, and he was just slaughtering them by the handful. And he utilized this as well, along with his two breathing styles, and just ran right through them. But like I said, he went hours of fighting, so this is pretty intense. Top of that, he's also capable of entering the selfless state, and what this does is the user's presence is entirely erased and masks the user's killer instinct and malice from their opponent. Their opponent cannot see this, so it's more or less, when he goes into selfless state, if they have access to transparent world or anything similar, they're no longer going to be able to read him. So he becomes unreadable. I just want to make that very clear. He becomes unreadable. Okay. On top of that, he's also capable of using water breathing and sun breathing. Once again, these aren't going to matter. These are more or less sword styles. We're not even going to mention into Kenshin's because it won't matter. Their sword style is not what matters here. End of the day, it's going to come down to quite a few different things here, but yes, he does have capability of using two different breathing styles. He's also got the Yoriichi Type 0 Nichiren Katana. It's another Black Blade Katana, which is considered rare. A lot of Demon Slayers considered that more or less like almost like a curse or bad omen, but the Black Blades are actually, that's directly what Yoriichi had as well, and he was the greatest Demon Slayer in all of Demon Slayer history. All right, well, what about his opponent here? What are we looking at? So we got Kenshin Himura. His real name is actually Shinta. Just a little tidbit there. He doesn't go by that. He does go by Kenshin Himura. His original name was Shinta when he was a small child before being adopted by Seijiro Hiko, which is his master, which is like he was the current master of the Hita Mitsurugi style, which is his form of swordplay, just to throw it out there. He, at this point, we're going to look at him after he has defeated even Anishi, but we're analyzing the anime version because when it gets into the manga and things like this, you get Anishi. Things get a little wonky there, but we're gonna go up to that tier. So he's at least that tier. So he's surpassed even the likes of Makoto Shishio and Anishi. And Anishi was probably one of his greatest opponents. One could also argue Makoto Shishi really was, but I'm not going to get into that too much. But he's 5 foot 2 inches tall, and he weighs approximately 106 pounds. This guy's light and he's shorter. As for his occupation, well, he used to be an assassin. He was known as the Battosai the Man-Slayer. He's slayed over 100 people during the war, but after that, because he felt so guilty of it, he needed to redeem himself. He became a wanderer, helping those along the way on his journey, never really staying at one place for too long until he met Kaoru, who later on in the story he ends up marrying and having a child with, and even passing along his sword style, the Hiten Mitsurugi style, to him as well. But his area of operation is Japan. He does wander. After he gets married, of course, he doesn't anymore, but he was more or less just a wanderer during that whole time and wandered all over Japan. Now, he has developed 2 different personalities here. So we have his wanderer personality, which is the side of him that really wants to redeem. It's a more or less kind of a childlike state. It's very humble, very kind. Just a good person overall. Very soft-spoken. He's optimistic. He's humble. But he is a pacifist. He doesn't want to fight if he doesn't have to. And this is one of his weaknesses to some degree. Against some guys, it's enemy friends. He's absolutely no that. So this can be a strength, it can be a weakness. But he is a pacifist in this personality state. But it is assassin, literally a 180 here. I extremely nice focus. It like him in this state. It just terrifies him because they can feel it. And he's incredibly ruthless. The way he handles his opponents in this state is ridiculous. Sometimes he doesn't toy. I'll never say that he toys, but he will maim the heck out of his opponents just to prove a point. Like, basically, back off. I'm giving you your chance to run, kind of thing. And they don't take it, and then he just slays him. He's just like, you're done then. But he hates killing, and once he realizes that's what he's done, it typically shatters his psyche for a bit, and it takes him a bit to recover from it. A little tidbit about him: he often puts others ahead of himself as he feels he needs to repent for the lives that he took as an assassin. Like I said, he took hundreds of lives, so that should tell you this is something he should never face. Ghost Rider. This would not go so well. Alright, now let's get into the meat and potatoes here. The strength. Well, he can easily cut through solid steel. Now, like I said before, cutting through solid steel with something like a blade, like a sword, not going to happen. It's just how the materials operate. It's going to come down to sharpness, but because fantasy's sake here, we're going to break it down to some degree. But just to break steel, it's around 40,000 psi. To actually cut through it, they're saying it's going to be at least 300,000 psi, on top of the blade needing to have an extreme level of sharpness, and the steel itself having to have a little, like the steel cutting through the other steel. It's got to be more or less a greater steel, so it would have to be basically the workmanship on this blade. It would have had to have been just absolutely amazing. But there's a lot of factors that break into it. But from what I gathered, the PSI required just for him to do this, and this is with a reverse blade, mind you, which is meaning what we would see typically on a katana, the front of it, where it looks like the blade, that's completely, it's like reversed. So the back of the blade's what cuts, while the front of it itself is very, it's flat. So something flat, more blunt, it's easier to go and break through steel. Now he's able to cut through it, now mind you, so we're looking, it's probably closer to at least the 300,000 PSI. But he's also flung a man headfirst into a ceiling with just the hilt of his sword, while using just a very, very fast sword drawing technique. He slammed Gohei, who's anywhere between 280 and 300 pounds, through a solid wood floor, which, mind you, is most likely Japanese cedar. And he did that with ease, which would take at least 4,560 PSI just to do so. Now, he did that from, he slammed him from up above, but mind you, he doesn't weigh very much. 106 pounds, plus on top that the sheer strength it would take. I mean, there's a lot breaking into it, but this would this is ridiculous. As for his durability, so while in his assassin state, now I want to go and just put this into perspective. While he's in his regular state, more or less an average guy, he can take some hits, a little more than the average guy, but not much. But while he's in assassin state, he has shrugged off slashes, direct slashes, from Makoto Shishio, who slashed him right across his chest. Hajime Saito, who has literally pierced him, stabbed him all the way through, just shrugged it off. And they were both former assassins, at least close to Kenshin's caliber. Shishio arguably was above to some degree, but it just kind of depends on how you read it and how you interpret that. Me personally, nobody's been able to go on top of Kenshin except for, I believe, Inishi got close. Pretty close, at least. So, and he was never actually a Battosai. So, or not Battosai, a Man-Slayer. And he's also capable of withstanding paralysis and fear-based aura techniques. This is where it comes to chi manipulation and his level of chi. And also through his sheer force of will. He's got a ridiculous willpower as well. So, as for his speed and agility, this is the part where he outspeeds a lot of guys. He's easily dispatched a group of gunmen before they could open fire, and easily defeated Seita Sojiro, who is faster than Kenshin, with a faster and more powerful sword drawing technique. Which, when I broke it down, he would have to be going. Well, his sword drawing technique would be at least Mach 2.76, which is approximately 2,117.663 miles per hour. That's how fast he's drawing. This is going to be one of those things. This is a big comparison point here, all right? So, for that, we go into combat capabilities. Well, we know he is a master swordsman. He's even defeated the likes of Sujiro Hiko, which was his master, his adoptive father, who is physically just superior to him. Strength. When it comes to sheer skill, you could argue he's more skilled. But he never partook in the war that Kenshin did. He thought it was absolutely stupid, blah, 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 blah. He was very, very much like, I'm staying out of it. But there's a lot of people out there that would say that Hiko Sujiro's, I can't say his last name, Hiko, his master, is more powerful than him up until Kenshin's death. After looking at the data, you could look at some of the stuff. Kenshin barely beats him. Barely. And his body's deteriorating because he doesn't have capabilities that his master does. And he has a very frail illness. But he's mastering Hita Mitsurugi stuff. So, but that we're going to get into more about that in a bit. So, while in his Wanderer state, he fights to quickly end the fight without maiming or killing. However, when he doesn't use his assassin state, he prefers to maim opponents with his full force and or kill. We have to go and analyze that. Personality and what state he's in. Okay. Next up, we have now he has powers. Regardless of anybody says, he has powers. So he's here. It'd be roughly at least 37 meters per second, which comes down to 82.7664 miles per hour. That's how fast he'd have to run to be able to do so. He's constantly, his feet are hitting the water super quick and real quick. We actually hear when he does run, he's fast enough. He's got what's called Godspeed. That's what, at least what they refer to it as in the show and in manga. He moves at a speed that literally the human eye can't even really technically detect. But this is more, it almost seems more like his evasive and drawing techniques and things like that. But he does run fast enough. We see this. It almost appears as if he disappears. He's also got paralysis aura resistance, fear aura resistance. So once again, you can't instill fear in him, and he can break free of anything like this. So he referred to them as spells in the show and manga, but they weren't. They were actually just different, more or less intimidation techniques. He's also got Chi enhancement, which it can enhance his combat capabilities without entering his assassin state, but it's also possible and very plausible that he can also enhance from the point of his assassin state as well. So making him even more powerful, more faster, things like this. He's also got low tier precognition. I'm just going to tell you guys right now, this is going to be one of those things that are going to cancel out in a lot of ways. So between him and Tanjiro, but he also has the work back to your fight. This is seeker. He can still stun his attacker. And very we do not we hand very like that. So fight. What he comes with is a reverse blade steel katana. Reverse. It's even been stated in the show. This blade is still ridiculous. It does things that's perfect game. Though this is later. We don't rough until he starts hitting like late 30s and fairly hand-to-hand combatant. Lacking a lot of skills. He even has to use sword techniques while fighting hand-to-hand just to kind of keep up. Even then, it doesn't really do. He also, I wanted to go and read here. He cannot read the unreadable. Right. So, mind you, this can play a factor as well. This includes his cannot. So now we're out there. So now we land some things. So let's get into the points here. How this is going to break down. So, like I said before, we have two personality states for Kenshin. So you're gonna see this often when it comes down to this. There's gonna be a lot of doubles where it's gonna look like, oh, Tanjiro wins this, but then he also loses this, or Kenshin loses this, but he also wins this. So we're gonna break this down. So while Kenshin is in his Wanderer state, he will lose personality-wise to Tanjiro. And the reason being is because he's not capable of being bloodlusted at this point. He cannot go to the point of killing or maiming. So Tanjiro will win that against that, personality-wise. He's willing to go to that extent if need be. That being said, the minute that Kenshin goes into his assassin state, that's where things are a bit different, because now Tanjiro all of a sudden no longer has that edge. Because Kenshin's more focused, he's got the experience, and he's going to use some very, very precise techniques that are just going to he's going for the kill, essentially. He is like uber bloodlusted. This is the first time I've actually analyzed a character that goes to that point of uber bloodlusting. He wants to draw blood. He wants to slay his opponent. Hence the term Battosai the Man-Slayer. He wants to, more so than even Jaws, more so than any of these other characters we've analyzed before. Literally more than any other character I've analyzed up until this point out of the 3 seasons so far. So that says a lot. And that's the part I want you guys to really focus on, because he has 2 different personality traits here. It does play a huge factor, as I was saying early on in the episode. This is the first time we've actually had a character that's really like that. Let's get it. This one shouldn't be too big of a surprise. When it comes to sheer strength, Tanjiro pushing things like this, where he's very consistent, where he's like, that should be about the striking, his attack potency, if you will. It's not. So that's pretty kind of a big factor here. This is gonna play a factor when it comes. But we've got other things we're gonna have to still get durability, speed, agility. Speed and agility. That's gonna be the interesting one. So let's get into durability now. Durability is going to go to Tanjiro, and it should be no surprise here. Tanjiro's been able to he survives attack greater, but they are going to argue that he technically, at the point, quite, in my opinion, that are capable of ripping steel apart. Got some scratches, got a little bloody, got some wounds and all this, but through his controlled breathing, he didn't. Of course, he survived some attacks that are pretty crazy. Being stabbed, slashed, all sorts. And continues to fight and win in a lot of cases. So when it comes down to it, yes, Kenshin loses out on that one. Keep up when it comes to durability, but he's also smaller. He's speed and agility. Now this should be no surprise at all. Kenshin out 767 miles per hour. Kenshin runs at, he runs fast enough to run on water. Tanjiro does not. He's got a reaction speed of 7 miles an hour. His running speed, however, is not that. we know that he's more or less just athletic. Here, when it comes to reactions, Kenshin blows him out of the water. 767 miles per hour, around that range versus over 2,000 miles. Yeah, no, doesn't even come close. Then after that, like I said, because negative, because Kenshin did that. Even with cheat, but that is if you were to do that, arguably, like, we're probably 500 miles an hour, which even greater outclassing of Tanjiro there. So I'm gonna load there. Let's continue. Here we go. Next, we're going on to martial prowess. Once again, not a surprise where this is going with the martial prowess. It's definitely not classy. I'm not going to give it so it's like an absolute massive outclassing here, as you'll see right here. I can't, because at the end of the day, Tanjiro has shown that he's proficient enough to take on even the greatest swordsman that Japan has to offer. He's comparable, and in a lot of cases, surpasses him. So when it comes down to it, Tanjiro could get to the level of almost to be in Kenshin's level of swordsmanship, just in a fight alone. This is where, like I said, we have to kind of we're combining some of the feats, and he's going to be comparable to Kenshin in that degree as he gets better in combat. So the longer the battle goes, technically he could surpass Kenshin potentially. So next up, we have ingenuity. This is an interesting one. It's interesting because, like, it types. Watch his wanderer state, his ingenuity. He's not trying to kill him. He's not going for. He's going to basically incapacitate.